you can see a glint in President Obama's eyes when he talks about Trump. Democrats are relishing this, and I can't blame them. That's been the concern for a general election against Hillary Clinton or anyone else with Donald Trump, that Democrats will just have a field day with some of the things that Donald Trump has said.
You did not see her, but you heard the voice of conservative commentator S.E. CUPP on CNN's Newsroom with Carol Costello, voicing concern about how Donald Trump might fare for Republicans in a general election. It is worth noting, on the other side, President Obama has not officially endorsed a candidate, but he's been ratcheting up the rhetoric against those rascally Republicans, especially Donald Trump and, more recently, Ted Cruz. Let's bring in our panel of journalists from Newsmax Washington, the White House correspondent for the National Journal, S.V. Date, and Skyping in from the nation's capital, political reporter for The Hill, Cate Martel. So, Shirish, Democrats gearing up for a, quote, easy campaign if it's Donald Trump? You know, it's one thing to deal in ridicule and to be self-confident, but isn't some of this lampooning kind of risky for President Obama and the Democrats?
Well, it might be a little risky if they get overconfident. And I guess we'll have to wait and see if they actually get to that state mentally where they're not treating him seriously and not worried about what could happen. As to lampooning, now, remember, this goes back probably to 2011 when Donald Trump claimed he'd sent a team of investigators to Hawaii. You're not going to believe what they're finding there. And then, of course, the president released his long-form birth certificate that afternoon, and that was that. That White House Correspondents' Dinner that April, in fact, was where he just went off on Trump. And who knows, maybe that was the point where Trump decided he's going to get even. He'll run for president himself or something. I mean, but it goes back a ways, this personal thing that that the president has for Trump, I think.
Well, it's interesting to watch this evolve and its latest iteration at this level. Cate, up to Capitol Hill. I'm kind of interested in my old colleagues in the House Republican Conference and those in the Senate Conference. Are they really panicked? We read somewhere that, they're so uneasy at the prospect of Trump being atop the GOP ticket. Do they really think the Senate and possibly the House could be in play, in danger of seeing Democrats take majorities?
So, JD, you make a good point. And the Senate is definitely at risk that Democrats could definitely take it. But on the House side, that would need for Democrats to retake it, they would need to claim 30 seats and flip those over. That's really hard to do. But I think what we have to look at is in November that, assuming that Donald Trump is the Republican nominee, there is a part of the Republican Party that has already said that they will never vote for him. So what ultimately brings people out to the polls is the top of the ticket. So you have to keep that in mind, that he could definitely pull away votes and help the Democratic Party. But where I think things get interesting is that Donald Trump is also tapping into a contingent of the electorate that hasn't habitually voted and hasn't voted in recent elections. So I think what's going to be interesting to see is, do the anti-Trump Republicans, do they end up voting for Dems, or do they stay at home? And do the people that end up voting for Donald Trump that haven't voted in the past, do they end up coming out to the polls, and which ends up having a bigger effect? But I also think what we have to keep in mind is what will actually end up, I think, hurting Republicans in November is, depending on how the Supreme Court nominee Merrick Garland, how that is handled between now and November. If he doesn't get a hearing, depending how that's handled, that could give Democrats the ammunition that they need to say, hey, look, vote for us. We're the ones trying to.
But it's so interesting to me, Cate, because we go back to the end of the George W. Bush administration. There was the so-called Biden rule. Now it's almost like newspeak. The vice president says there is no Biden rule. When he was a senator, he was fine with holding up Republican nominations. But apparently now, with this president and with the Obama-Biden administration, we have to carve out an exception. Something else happened. We only got a couple of minutes, but I want to get back to this, SV, and it has to do with the press briefing. I guess this was Tuesday. Again, it's the president asked about Donald Trump. And what's interesting is the press corps kind of has an active response in this exchange. Let's listen and watch.
Mr. President, the Republican frontrunner today outlined his plan to pay for the wall on the border, scoring undocumented undocumented immigrants in the U.S. from sending money back home. What would be the real implication of this plan? And are his foreign policy proposals already doing damage to U.S. relations abroad?
The answer to the latter question is yes.
To watch that exchange and the ambient sound, SV, you have come on this program before, and you say, no, most journalists are there to chronicle what happens. To me, they sounded like cheerleaders listening to what was said, the way that question was introduced, mocking someone running, and I guess they have the right to do that, and maybe you'll say they separate that, but I'm just interested, both in your reaction to the reaction of the press, and as President Obama, in addition to his constitutional duties, now emerging as the key anti-Trump messenger for the left, wherever it may exist, but most prominently in the Democrat Party. We've got about 45 seconds.
All right. Well, on the latter one first, I think the president has been the anti-Trump messenger for the last 5 years. Like I said, going back to 2011 and that whole birth certificate thing. That'll probably continue. Why wouldn't it? I mean, if the president thinks he can help the Democratic nominee by, if Donald Trump ends up as the Republican nominee, by ridiculing Donald Trump and driving down his potential numbers, yeah, he'll do it. As to the first one, I think what you're seeing there is you probably, I don't know if you have, there's a two-shot and you can see the press members, the reporters in that room, but I think what you see is the president starting to react as soon as the question comes up about Donald Trump, everyone knowing full well the history that's been there. As to whether Trump personally is his policies and his statements have been silly, well, I think they speak for themselves.
Yeah, and we will have to let the people decide. That four-letter word time is in our way. SV and Cate, we thank you for your perspective. We're back with more.